Now, if you have not heard, breaking news, it is now official that South Carolina will be the first state in the Democrat primary. No more Iowa, at least not this time around. Now, some people are really happy about this and some people are not happy about it. And I'm going to talk about both sides. But first and foremost, I want to show you this clip here from Case Study QB, where it says, breaking news that the DNC approved the new primary order with South Carolina going first. Let's go ahead and get into this.
Remake the party's presidential nominating calendar, embracing President Biden's push for South Carolina to be the first state to hold its contest in 2024, and replacing Iowa amid calls for greater racial, geographic, and economic diversity in the process. And that move was really long expected, but it does not guarantee that the calendar will ultimately be enacted as designed.
Let's pause there just for a second. So one of the reasons they want to change it is because they want more racial diversity. Obviously, if you look at the two states, Iowa and New Hampshire, I've never been to Iowa. I've been to New Hampshire multiple times. It's like, boop, right there above me, like right there. But these states are predominantly white states. So what they wanted to do was to choose a state, let's just be real, where there were more African Americans. Okay. But why South Carolina? And I think this is the question you really need to ask. There are other states where there are more African Americans. There are blue states where there are more African Americans. Why not choose a state like Maryland? Why choose a red state like South Carolina? We'll get into it. Let's go on with the video.
In my Saturday night panel, Aaron Haynes, MSNBC political contributor, and comedian Chuck Nice. Hey. Chuck, great to see you in person. I can't believe you braved the cold weather and made it into the studio.
Well,
tonight.
you guys sent a car.
Yeah,
so I didn't really brave.
Hopefully it had heating, though, right?
Yeah, it did not, but that's okay.
Aaron, I'll start with you. So President Biden here said that he wanted these calendar changes to ensure that voters of color had a bigger voice in the process earlier on. Do you think this will help deliver that?
It's not voters of color, though. See, this is the piece here where I feel like they're not framing it correctly. Let's just be real. It's not voters of color. It's African American voters that they're trying to attract. So I just saw Sophie's comment, Nevada not racially diverse, ? Come on. It's not about that, though. They're looking for a certain group of people. They're looking for the African American population, and the African American population in Nevada is not as large as it is in a state like South Carolina. So that's the key. So he said people of color. It's not people of color. I want to be very clear. This is just something that the Democratic Party, they're going to throw that term around to make it seem like they're trying to include everyone under that umbrella. But that's not what they're trying to target. They are trying to target African American voters, and particularly African American voters that are older and that tend to be more conservative Democrats. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Remember, I went to college in South Carolina. I lived there a couple of years after I graduated from college. I know very much well what the demographic is like in South Carolina. I know exactly what they're trying to do. Let's go on.
That's absolutely right, Amen. I mean, look, we know that South Carolina delivered victory for Biden, particularly Black voters, and a lot of them were seeing this as a return on their investment, frankly, from 2020. A lot of folks in our profession didn't necessarily have this one on their bingo card coming out of 2020, but here we are. I mean, I think, I certainly was one of those among us in the journalism class predicting that South Carolina was going to be a turning point in the 2020 election because of the state's diversity. And even though Iowa didn't really do themselves any favors in 2020, I mean, if we remember that debacle that was the Iowa caucuses, it's also true that the South is emerging as politically significant because of the diversity, because it is more reflective of the changing electorate and frankly, the electorate that the Democratic Party is seeking to go after, and a place where candidates should be investing early as a winning strategy. And that's not just Democrats, though. Georgia has also moved up. We saw what happened there in 2020, in 2021, 2022.
Yeah, but I'm going to debunk something she just said there. Yes, they are starting to look more at those southern states. And she mentioned Georgia. Georgia got bumped up. But why isn't Georgia first? Why isn't Georgia first? Why is South Carolina first? What happened in 2020? In 2020, South Carolina was the state that changed the race for Joe Biden. Let's remember, I'm going to go back and show you the numbers, the poll numbers from South Carolina. South Carolina was the state that changed the game. Bernie Sanders had won New Hampshire. He went on to win Nevada, which is diverse, as someone pointed out in the chat. And then went on to South Carolina. And Jim Clyburn said to vote for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden won South Carolina. And after that, all they had to do, Obama just had to pick up a phone and tell Pete, Amy, and the rest of them to drop out of the race before Super Tuesday. And that was it. This is important to know. This is very important to know. They didn't put Georgia first. Let's be real. She mentioned that, but they didn't make Georgia first. They didn't make Florida first. They didn't make North Carolina first. They didn't make Maryland first. There's more Black people in Maryland than there are in South Carolina. Maryland is more diverse than South Carolina. I've lived in both states. I know. So if it was really just about racial diversity, why wouldn't they have made a state like Maryland first? Let's go on.
But New Hampshire, to your point, definitely appears to not be going down without a fight. But just because things haven't always been done a certain way doesn't mean that that's the way that they have to stay. That's the lesson of our country. That's the lesson of our democracy, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with you. South Carolina, and specifically Jim Clyburn, single-handedly changed things around. His endorsement coming out and changed things around for President Biden in 2020. I don't think anyone can deny that. But to Aaron's point, not everyone in the DNC is necessarily happy about this. Folks in New Hampshire, one DNC member saying that I think this will only hurt President Biden in our popular purple battleground state. What do you think of that, Chuck?
You know, in a way, it might be. There might be a bit of a backlash to what he's done. It might seem a bit transactional, but like Aaron just said, it's, you know, this is what happens when you deliver for a candidate. You know, you want that candidate to turn around and deliver for you, and that's what happened with South Carolina. Now, New Hampshire, listen, they're very diverse as well. You know, there are blonde white people, there are brunette white people, there are, you know, somewhat tan white people. I love New Hampshire, but the real deal is that I don't think he should have done this. Does it really benefit him? Which is why it might be a really cool move, because this doesn't benefit him. If he's running again, someone's going to primary him. So where does he benefit in this? Maybe he's just doing what he said he was going to do. Promise kept.
Aaron, do you think that the DNC is going to be united behind all of this when you see some of the kind of divisions that have emerged with folks like in New Hampshire saying that the president might be overplaying his hand with focusing too much on the South?
Well, I think that's going to be interesting to see. I think that you did have Democrats certainly in 2020 and for years, even before that, saying that the party should be more reflective of the country and the electorate. And so this is a move, frankly, you know, that does kind of speak to that. Iowa and New Hampshire, frankly, not particularly diverse states. And when.
But it's been that way for years, and you guys have always known that, and you guys didn't have those complaints back then. The only reason you want to push this now is not necessarily about the racial diversity. It's about the fact that South Carolina was the state that changed the game for Joe Biden. And that's why they want to make it first, because they want to send a strong message. They want him to come out strong. They want him to start off strong. You guys see what I'm saying? They don't want what happened last time to happen again. They don't want it to start with Iowa and New Hampshire again. Especially if Marianne Williamson, it looks like she is going to run, especially if he's primary challenge. They don't want to take that. It would look bad for a sitting president to go through that again and to lose a state like Iowa and New Hampshire. And by the way, they ain't really feeling him in New Hampshire. I got to tell you that much. They are not really feeling him. Okay. So it would look bad. It would look bad if that were to happen again. And then it's like, oh, well, let's just rely on South Carolina again. So they're going to start with South Carolina. And I saw a comment here from Colin that said, and Marianne Williamson, Breaking Point's crew believe that she has a chance. Guys, this is a game changer. This is a game changer. So automatically, right out of the gate, he's going to get Jim Clyburn's endorsement again, but this time at the very beginning of the race. That sets a tone. So people have to understand, Clyburn, the movement killer. That's right, P. Wayne Smith. This is what's going to happen.
Those states were chosen to kind of be first in the nation. The country looked a lot differently than it does now. The vote that just happened at this winter meeting, if that's any indication, there is a lot of support for changing this primary calendar. But as you said, Eamon, this is far from being a done deal yet. For
my theory is that the food in South Carolina and Georgia is way better than Iowa. You want to start I always go where the food is personally.
And they got jokes. Okay, so let's move on, because I really want to dive into this here. Democrats make South Carolina first presidential primary voting state. The DNC officially moved the state ahead of Iowa and New Hampshire for its 2024 primary, following, highlight this, President Biden's recommendation. He recommended it. So you guys see, when I tell you they can change the rules, and they can change the rules. They can change the structure. They can change the format. Just like that. Just like that. Let's go on. The DNC on Saturday officially dethroned Iowa and New Hampshire from the status they enjoyed for decades, leading off the presidential primary, ratifying President Joe Biden's recommendation for the 2024 calendar. Now, why is it okay for a sitting president to recommend a change in the primary calendar? Why is that even okay? Why is this allowed? We should be asking these questions, guys. That should not be okay, whether you like Joe Biden or not. Imagine if Trump did that. How would you feel? Let's go on. South Carolina will now kick off things for Democrats, with Michigan and potentially Georgia joining the early states in the biggest shakeup of the presidential primary in years, while Nevada will go second. So you see what they're doing here? They'll start with one of the more conservative states that has a larger population of African Americans. Then they're going to move to Nevada, which is one of the states that has a larger populations of Latino Americans, right? Didn't Bernie win the Latino vote in Nevada? So you see what they're doing? So this is what's happening. New Hampshire could go on the same day as Nevada if Republican legislators and governors change a state law. Georgia, too, will need cooperation from Republican officials to take advantage of the new slot now available to them. Republicans are sticking with the traditional roles for Iowa and New Hampshire for the presidential primary in 2024, but Democrats have for years been looking to promote more diverse states. So again, we have to pay attention to the framing, because they keep framing it this way of promote more diverse states. But there are states that are more diverse than South Carolina. So when someone feeds you this line, make sure you push that right back at them and say, if that is the goal, then why aren't they choosing states that are more diverse than South Carolina? South Carolina also has the oldest electorate. The oldest electorate, so which is particularly the boomer generation. They come out to vote. They are reliable voters. You see, he didn't pick a state like California or Maryland, as I mentioned before. You see, he didn't pick a state like New Jersey. Those states are diverse. Let's go on. The calendar does what is long overdue. That's coming from DNC chair Jamie Harrison, who is also from South Carolina. So, of course, the chair is going to go along with it. That's his state. It puts Black voters at the front of the process in South Carolina. It keeps Nevada, where Latinos have been building power, and it adds Michigan, the heartland where unions built the middle class of this nation, and Georgia, the front runner, the forefront of the New South. You guys see what is happening here. You have the DNC chair and the president of the United States saying, yeah, let's go with South Carolina. Let's put them first. Nobody sees the conflict of interest here. If that's the state that the DNC chair comes from. The Democratic Party looks like America, Harrison continued. Oh, they got a typo. Typo. And so does this proposal. The new calendar puts South Carolina first on February 3rd, 2024, followed by New Hampshire and Nevada on February 6th, then Georgia, February 13th, and Michigan, February 27th. After that, any state is free to schedule its primary when it wants. We're going to look at some numbers here in a second. Oh boy. The party finally exerted the political will to shake up the status quo after Iowa botched its 2020 caucuses, which delayed results for days and shifted further into the Republican column. Let's highlight this piece here. Shifted further into the Republican column. Didn't Bernie Sanders win Iowa? You guys see what they're doing here? Again, pay attention to the framing. How did it shift further into the Republican column, at least part of the Democratic primary, when Bernie Sanders won the state? That would have been shifting it to the left. You got to call these things out. You got to call these things out. The calendar is still not final, since it is now up to the states to change their primary dates to comply. South Carolina, Nevada, and Michigan have already codified their positions, while the others have not. They're already doing it, you guys. They're already doing it. Now, I want to remind you what the votes were in South Carolina 2020. The video doesn't play anymore, but that's okay because all I need is a screenshot. South Carolina Democratic presidential primary results. Just want to remind you how things changed. Joe Biden got 49%. Bernie Sanders, 20%. Tom Steyer, damn, I forgot about that guy. I'm sorry. I so forgot about him. That's the same guy he's on the stage during the South Carolina primary. He was dancing on the stage to back that ass up. He was trying really hard. Tom was really trying. Anywho, Tom Steyer got 11%. Pete 8% and Elizabeth Warren 7%. And see, this was something I had predicted anyway. Pete and Elizabeth Warren were not going to do well in the South. And I want to point out something else. Let me show you how they messed things up. Pete got 8% and he dropped out right before Super Tuesday. Everybody remember that? I remember. Elizabeth Warren received less than Pete. She got 7%, but she stayed in. And I said it back then and I'll say it again. Elizabeth Warren stayed in on Super Tuesday to split the Bernie vote. She knew she wasn't going to win. She didn't win her own state. She didn't win my state here in Massachusetts. Bernie came in second here and Joe Biden came in first. She didn't even win her own state. She knew she was not going to win running against those two, and she stayed in anyway. Make it make sense, guys. You guys see the numbers. Let's all remember, if he actually did better than Elizabeth Warren in South Carolina, she did worse than him. Why did he drop out, but she didn't drop out? Because they knew that if Pete would have stayed in, that could have actually hurt Biden. Oh, I told you. I don't forget. I do not forget these things. Casey said Sabby facts. Yeah, I don't forget it. I remember very well, very well. The snake. Yes, Mr. X. The snake. She knew she had no damn chance, and she stayed in. So they're already doing it. They're already doing it. And I don't know if Marianne Williamson has finished this, has seen this or not, but they already trying to make it anybody who's thinking about some type of primary challenge against Joe Biden. They already trying to do it. So you can already go ahead and hand South Carolina to Joe Biden because he already got Jim Clyburn right in the pocket. It's crazy, isn't it? JB said Pepperidge Farm remembers. Just like that, they can change the rules. Let's go to some of the comments here. Betsy says, I assume they changed it to South Carolina first because the DNC would be too embarrassed to have Biden lose the first contest. Bingo. Remember how it used to be before 2020. The person who won Iowa, at least for Democrats, went on to win. Right? He lost Iowa, he lost New Hampshire, he lost Nevada, and it was South Carolina that changed that race for him. JB says they're looking for more conservative Black voters. That's another thing I was going to mention. Thank you for the reminder, JB. Because the Democratic voters, the African-American Democratic voters in South Carolina tend to be more conservative. Just keeping it real. I live there, I know. P. Wayne Smith, Clyburn. Oh, yeah, I saw that one. Thank you for the super chat, Snork. South Carolina also has voters controlled by the church. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that in the South, though. Not just South Carolina. North Carolina has that. Georgia has it, too. But I totally get where you're coming from. Zero Joshua says, which abusive parent would you vote for? Right? She's Black. Remember, the DNC is a corporation. 100%. Just like that. Thank you for the super chat, M. Smith. If Trump runs, he might still lose South Carolina. I don't know. I don't know about that. I've never seen South Carolina turn blue. Not to say it can't happen, but I don't know about that. It's still a red state. It is still a red state, but we shall see. Thank you for the super chat, Natalie. And this corruption is why civil disobedience is imperative. You go.